let's move on to the session. The session has been organized under the aegis of Electronics and ICT Expert Committee of BCIC. We'd like to specially thank Dr. V. Veerappan, Chairman of the Electronics and ICT Expert Committee and President of Tasol Semiconductors, for curating this session for the benefit of our members. Due to some unavoidable reasons, personal commitment, Dr. Veerappan couldn't join this session. So we will carry on this. This session has been addressed by Mr. Rajiv Kushu, Director, Corporate Affairs and Government Relations, Texas Instruments India, and also the Chairman of India Electronics and Semiconductors Association. On behalf of BCIC, we express our sincere thanks to Dr. Rajiv for accepting our invitation to address on this important subject. We would also like to thank all the participants for joining in today's session. We request all of you to kindly mute your mic and webcam option to enhance our bandwidth strong and as well as avoid any disturbance in the background. Please post your questions in the chat box only. The speaker will respond to the question during the session and also request you to raise your hand in case you like to ask a question. Before I could invite the speaker for today's session, I will request our immediate past president, Mr. Devesh Agrawalji, to share his thoughts on the Indian semiconductors industry and his contribution to India. Over to you, Deveshji.
Thank you, Prithvi. Good morning to everybody, all my fellow BCIC members and guests. A very special thanks to Mr. Rajiv Kushu for taking the time out today to address our chamber. The semiconductor industry is a very crucial industry, and it is probably one industry where India is lagging far behind our competitors in the world. If one looks at it today, India exports motorcycles, it exports pretty much all the modern generation products, it exports components for a lot of products, but semiconductors is something that we are almost 100% reliant on imports. I am reminded of the 1990s, and I feel that we are at a similar cusp at this stage. In the 1990s, when India was mulling a cellular telephone system, it had one benefit, that it did not have, one can say, a legacy system that it needed to dismantle before it put a new system into place. And it could directly choose the new, at that time, digital CDMA and GSM technologies. It didn't have to go to the old analog ETAC system. And if any of you remember the old Motorola Microtac set of phones, so I sort of remember that time. And I was just discussing with Mr. Kushu that I feel India is at a similar cusp at this stage where it can jump into the latest manufacturing, or the highest levels of semiconductor fab manufacturing. The technologies are there. It's not that Indian engineers are not capable. We are already, I think we're going to hear from him how Indian engineers are already contributing to the latest generation of products that we do use. The design is in India. It may be fabricated overseas. It's time to bring that fabrication to India. And I think we should hear more from him about this. I personally feel that there is a great opportunity for India, and it is something that India must get into right now. As we can see, worldwide, we are facing a tremendous semiconductor shortage. Every industry which pretty much today, every industry relies on semiconductors, on ICs, and we are seeing car manufacturers, motorcycle manufacturers who are cutting back their production, unable to deliver products to their customers because there are no semiconductors, no ICs available. The lead times are so long, and it's a profitable industry. And I feel that India should get into the manufacturing. I look forward, I'm quite sure, along with you. And Rajiv ji, I extend my thanks both on behalf of President Parshuraman and Chairman Dr. Veerappan. Thank you so much for sparing your time and addressing our chamber. Welcome to the Bangalore Chamber of Industry and Commerce, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deveshji, for the talk. Before I could invite Rajiv, let me have the pleasure of a brief introduction of Rajiv. Since 2015, he has been involved in strategy and corporate affairs across functional roles, across different business units and various government departments like Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Department of Science and Technology, DST. He has been responsible for the various designs in semiconductor sector that has enabled scale of operation for Texas Instruments in Western India. Over to you, Rajiv.
Okay, thanks. Thank you
Thanks.
very much. So will you be able to drive the presentation for me? Because somehow, okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. See, good morning to everybody. Thanks for the great opportunity. I think I really appreciate the opportunity which has been given by you and allowing me to talk to the people. As everybody said, and particularly Mr. Agrawal, that this is an important industry, and automotive industry did not really care about semiconductors a couple of years back, but then probably at that point of time, at least a decade back, there was hardly any semiconductors in the automotive. But today the scene is completely different. You pick up any equipment, whether it is automotive or anything which touches each one of us, you will find a semiconductor inside that, driving the technology part of it. So with that, probably we'll go to the next slide, and then please stop me wherever you feel, or we can either do it towards the end of the presentation. Probably that may make it more, but then please feel free. I would like it to be more interactive, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. So agenda, what I want to cover here is basically talk about the electronics market in India, consumption versus production, growth strategies, and then key government initiatives I'm going to touch base, which are very, very important, and some of the key suggestions which we are suggesting to the government. I will cover that as well. But I will definitely talk about the semiconductors, the kind of work what the Bangalore in particular is doing in the overall semiconductor space. The next slide, please. So just a sec. I'm not. Let me try to adjust. Okay. So if you see the electronics market, so it is basically definitely a sunshine market in India. It grew at the compound annual growth rate of 14% from 2016 to 2019. It is expected to grow uh, at a rate of around 16.6% between 2019 to 2025. Uh, One more thing, see, this whole the data, whatever I'm sharing was done together with Frost and Sullivan along with IESA in 2020. But the numbers which we are talking about, it does not incorporate the impact of PLIs, which have started from 2020 March onwards. This report actually came just before the PLI. So whatever numbers we are talking about, when I said 16.6% growth from 2019 to 2025, we basically will exceed that and exceed it by a mile, which is a really positive part of it. So coming to the total demand, so we grew at a CAGR of 12.6% from 2016 to 2019, and this is expected to grow from around 14.9% between 2019 and 2025. Exports are expected to grow even faster to around 30.8% CAGR. So, which is very, very important. If you see the graph on the left-hand side, you will see the export graph growing faster. See, what this means is India will leap into the top 3 countries in ESDM consumption. It will also leap into the top 5 countries in the electronics production. And in terms of the GDP, today the contribution is around 3.4% in 2019. This is expected to reach 6.4% in 2025, which means that we are going to add close to 1 crore jobs by 2025, which is both direct and indirect. So this gives you some idea. Maybe to the next slide, please, which is electronics product consumption versus production. So domestic manufacturing grew to 81 billion from 48 billion, which is really very, very positive at a CAGR of 19.1%. And this is again expected to reach $260 billion by 2025, which means we will grow at 21.5%, which is again very, very healthy. Although you will still see there's a gap between 260 billion versus the 368 billion, but the gap is narrowing down as we speak. So as a result, what is happening is a reduction from 57% to 49% when it comes to import between 2016 and 2019. And again, from 2019 to 25, we will this will again further go down to 29%, which means a saving of close to $66 billion in the forex. So what we have observed and what you will see in the graph down is that domestic value addition still is very, very small. It is still in teens, although it's now 17%, but ideally it should grow to 40 to 50% by 2025. If we are able to achieve that, this means that we are able to add another $60 billion in 2025 by moving from 17% value addition to 40% value addition. See, typically today, most of the work which is done in the country is contract manufacturing, and that does not basically the value addition is still less than 20%. In many cases, is 11 to 12%, but in many cases around 17%, depending upon the phone which you're talking about. Next slide, please. So if you see here, the electronics market, and I alluded to it, only 9% of the total production is high value products, and majority in 2016 as well as in 2019, and even going beyond 2020 in 2025, you will see majority of the constituent is low value addition, and that's where the pain point is. That's where our suggestion to the government is. I think that I will cover in the next slide. So now coming to the design, and that's where Mr. Agarwal was alluding to. So we grew from $13 billion to $20 billion from 2016 to 2019 at a CAGR of 15.4%. And this is expected to grow to $60 billion by 2025, which means that the design will again grow at a CAGR of even faster, 20.1%. We're already seeing an impact of it. And I mean, you must have already seen a lot of those news, and that there's hardly any company in the global semiconductor which does not have a development center in Bangalore. I mean, if you pick up companies, which includes the company where I belong to, which is Texas Instruments, is Bangalore is the second largest design center for us in globally, and after US, this is the second largest. And the same holds true for many other semiconductor players, whether it is Intel's of this world or Qualcomm's of this world, and even Taiwanese major like MediaTek. Their biggest R&D center outside of Taiwan is in Bangalore. So I think I heard in one of the comments in one of the senior leaders in semiconductors who said that if today we have to set up a R&D center, there's only one place in the world where you can ramp from 0 to 100 people organization semiconductor, and that is Bangalore. So Bangalore has very, very special place when it comes to semiconductors, and thanks to many semiconductor players who have made Bangalore as their second home, and this will continue. And now we see many other companies, whether it is product companies like Facebooks of this world or the Googles of this world, they've also set up the semiconductor design in the country. Some of the rough estimates and rough figures, if I can share, is that globally Indian engineers typically do close to 30% of the workforce globally in semiconductors, roughly maybe 25 to 30% are Indians. So as Mr. Agarwal rightly pointed out, I think when it comes to design and development of semiconductors, I think Indians play a very, very important role, not only in India, but globally as well. And as a result, if we focus on our strengths, and there have been a couple of initiatives in this direction, particularly from IESA together with the government of India as well as government of Karnataka, we came up with a uh, with a with a fabless accelerator called SAFAL, Semiconductor Fabless Accelerator lab based out of Bangalore, which today houses close to 10 to 20 semiconductor fabless companies. So these are people who probably left their multinational companies and started building the fabless products out of India. Today, all of them rely on global fabless services companies, fab services companies, whether it is TSMCs of this world or others, to make their products. But then probably soon we may see some positive news coming in from different players. As we are talking, there are more than 20 expression of interest from people to set up a semiconductor fab in the country. This does not include only the state of the art fabs, but it also talks about some specialty fabs. When I say specialty fabs, these are fabs which play an important role in the automotive, whether it is the power supplies, whether it is the battery management system or the motor control devices. Most of the devices, majority of the devices which goes into the automotive come from analog and mixed signal fabs, and that's where we have a very good opportunity. For example, specialty fabs like silicon carbide or gallium arsenide, these are these are the technologies which are still kind of not so mature globally. So we have an opportunity to uh, jump here, jump the time what we have lost of not having a fab in the country. So I'm pretty sure, I think probably in next few quarters, we may see a big announcement in the fab. Although I don't know the names, but I'm pretty sure there are at least 20 plus companies who have shown interest in setting up the fab in the country. So now coming as a result of this, we have seen significant success stories in the country. You must have recently heard about a big acquisition of Tejas Networks, which is again a Bangalore-based company, has I think Tatas have put substantial investment in that. So you are seeing some really good intentions by our local multinationals in the ESDM space. Similarly, eInfo chips by Aero was a good success story. Sankalp by ICL was a good story. I think what it does is it also prompts the people who are in their cushy jobs to come out of their cushy jobs and start fabulous or a semiconductor design services company, which finally gets secured. So in the whole process, you create the ecosystem, and also the wealth creation also happens automatically. And I think I talked about incentives and support design companies to grow. I think way forward is basically ease of doing business, and then upscale capabilities of workforce, incentivize research, IP development, and the other. Can you go to the next slide, please? So just a sec, I just want to be sure that we are on the same slide. Yeah. So now coming to the from some of the incentives, which is basically cascading of incentives, which is incentives and incentives. If you see on the left hand side, we already have electronic components, whether it's active, passives, PCB, sensors, transformers. So there are production linked incentives which are coming to this. And then we have capex linked initiatives coming in the sub assemblies, whether it's camera modules, display assemblies, vibrator motors, data cables, mechanics. Then on the finished goods, whether it is mobile phones, laptops, so you have production linked incentives. What I'm trying to tell is that because government is not is letting the cascading of incentives happen, which means that people who are um, making the devices here, so they get an incentive, which they pass it on to the sub assembly guys, which they finally pass it on to the product guys who are manufacturing mobile phones and laptops. So the impact is really, really high. So it is not. So you can see capex incentives of 15 to 25%, and then you have also a lot of remission of duties and taxes on exports. So which makes manufacturing in the country really very, very well. I mean, we are really well positioned compared to our past years and past policies. See, what is happening is also, if you go to the next slide, is that some of the incentives for the electronics manufacturing, whether I said about the production linked incentives, which is talking about 4 to 6% on the incremental production, and similarly for the target was basically mobile phone and specific electronic components. And if you see the outlay, the government of India has kept an outlay of $7.5 billion basically as incentives for the electronic manufacturing. So it is really very, very positive. Never ever in the history of India we had so much of incentives coming in. And this also includes some of the incentives which are coming into the semiconductor areas. I think you must have heard about some of the announcements where the government said that they are willing to pay an incentive as high as $1 billion per semiconductor player if they set up a manufacturing fab in the country. Next slide. So if you see for the PLIs for large scale electronics manufacturing, these are the list of companies who are actually leveraging the production linked incentives. So if you see on the mobile phone, it started with mobile Foxcons of this world, Pegatrons of this world, and Vistrons of this world. And if you see the design companies, I think you now will see that some of the Indian companies like Lava, Micromax have actually put their hats in the ring, and they are also now applied for the production linked incentives. So you will soon see many of Indian makes also becoming popular. You must have seen in the past, whether it is Lava or Micromax, they used to have a substantial portion of the mobile phone market in the country, but they could not actually sustain it. And the reason why they could not sustain it was purely because of one reason: they didn't have the IP in the country. They were only doing the manufacturing in the country, and it was basically white box coming from outside, and they just labeling it. I think they have learned it the hard way, and now they are moving in the right direction by setting up the R&D in the country. And so you will probably see a change in this segment soon, when the local guys will start and basically making differentiated phones, what we today see only from the Chinese or Apples or Samsungs of this world. So some of the electronic components guys who have shown interest, this is the list of the components guys who are willing to set up manufacturing in the country and are leveraging the incentives, whether it is AT&S, TDKs, Shogini, and Deki, and many combination of local and global players. Next slide, please. So PLI of IT hardware, I think this is one important thing which is happening, is that the IT hardware companies finally have started showing interest. And again, the interest is more because of the incentives which are being talked about. And many of you must have heard, although the bill has not been passed in the parliament, I didn't hear it, it may be in the process, is that India is going to have the data protection policy, and which is personal data protection, which means that all the sensitive personal data of each of the 1.3 billion or 1.4 billion people cannot be sent overseas. So it has to be stored in the country. What it means is that this propels the big growth of servers in the country. So as a result, so it is very, very timely that Government of India came up with the PLI for IT hardware. And we will see companies like Dell and others showing interest in that. And then some of the domestic companies who have applied for the PLI for IT hardware includes VVDN of this world, which are again one of a big Indian multinational in the making, which is based out of Delhi, but they have offices in Bangalore, Chennai, US, and different places. Although they started as a services company, but today they are building products which are being consumed by many of us, knowingly, unknowingly, both in white label form as well as in the product, um, in their own brand as well. Next slide, please. So you see, making India a global hub for manufacturing. So 25 billion in physical support has been rolled out. As I said, 7 billion when it comes to support for electronics manufacturing, whether it is PLI, scheme capex incentives, development of electronics manufacturing clusters. And if you see on the right-hand side, support for allied sector, so is also happening, whether it is advanced chemistry, cell, automobile, auto components, telecom and networking, solar photovoltaic modules, white goods. So all of this were close to $13 billion. And then the fab, which I talked about, $5 billion. So they're expecting at least 2 to 3 fabs will come into the country, and on an average $1 billion per fab. And again, this time what they have done differently is that although they talk about $1 billion, it does not restrict it at $1 billion. So they are willing to customize. That's why the expression of interest rather than a straightaway incentive. So they have asked for expression of interest once, for example, a company like A is ready to invest in the fabrication in the country. So the people will sit across the table and ask what kind of incentives is relevant for them. So, for example, a 7 nanometer fab, the kind of incentives which they will require will be completely different than analog semiconductor fab, which may be at 180 nanometer, because today, whether we like it or not, more than 60 to 70% of the analog semiconductors is done at 180 nanometer, and then the rest is done at 90 nanometer and 65 nanometers. Very few percentage of the analog mixed signal devices today happen at 65 nanometers. And the reason why government is also looking at setting up a analog fab in the country, and there is one serious player which we have come across, is Tower Semiconductors together with, you must have heard about it, is Next Orbit, is planning and have shown interest and have shown their expression of interest to set up a 65 nanometer fab, analog mixed signal fab in the country. So which basically will be good enough for us to start, and we will be able to manufacture analog products for at least 25 to 30 years from today. So this technology, as I said, in analog is definitely latest. So we are waiting how this moves, but then I'm sure that they have put up expression of interest on that. Moving to the next slide, please. So coming to the R&D incentives, so I think whether it comes to income tax, sponsored research, customs duty exemption, I think the policies right now basically also accelerates R&D incentives. One of the reasons why we are seeing a huge requirement of Indian engineers is not only because of the skill sets. Skill set definitely is the important factor, but the R&D incentives play a very, very important role as a catalyst to bring in more R&D investments in the country. Next slide. So some of the points which I kind of mentioned or alluded in my previous slide is only 9% of the total products are high value add today. Products which have domestic value addition and which is greater than 60% is still less. It's only $4 billion in 2016, which touched $7 billion in 2019, and in 2025, this is going to touch around $23 billion. So what is needed is that to focus on innovation-led design-led manufacturing. So design, innovation, and IP will help create high value-add products. Focus on high-value cases, whether it is medical, agri-tech, AV, EV, electric vehicles, environment, AI, and ML. So these are the technologies where we need to really focus on in terms of building design-led products. And then one of the initiatives which you must have heard about is 1K, 10K, and 100K, which is basically 1K of startups, 10K of IP creation, and 100K crore of business value. What we focus at IESA is to have 100 fabless companies, 900 electronic product companies, 7,000 crore of seed funds to be created, expand SAFAL model, which I talked about, Semiconductor Fabless Accelerator Lab, and have and the plan is, and we're in the process of talking with the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology to take it beyond Bangalore. So today, Safal has become a kind of a showpiece or a reference for rest of the states to follow. And what we have proposed is to have 4 or 5 of such accelerators around India, so that we are able to catch the diversity of talent we have across the country, and also give opportunity to different regions to build fabless products. The reason why we are stressing more on fabless products is because once you have IP in your control, it really does not matter where you produce, whether you produce tomorrow when we have a 7 nanometer fab here, or a 45 nanometer fab in the country, or you fab it outside the country. As long as you own the IP, you're really talking at the position of your strength rather than a position of your weakness. That doesn't mean that fab is not important, but then I think IP is equally important, in fact more important, if you ask me personally. The other thing which we as IESA are really pushing is on the electropreneur parks. We started this electropreneur park almost 4 years back, together with the government of India under Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, set it up in South Campus in Delhi. And today, more than 50 companies have actually graduated from there. The startups have graduated, and they have actually started doing business and have started producing products from this acceleration program or incubation program, which we did together with STPI and Delhi University. And what I said is that we want to increase the impact, 50% increase in the high value add products by 2025. If we are able to do that, we can actually move from $23 billion to $35 billion in the value addition. So which means that kind of impact it brings when it comes to the value addition. And a lot of it is basically based on the IP. Next slide, please. So as I said, current value addition 17%, activities which is contributing to 17% of domestic production includes assembly, testing, PCB and PCB assembly. Strategies basically making recently announced is PLI schemes based on value addition. So we're also suggesting to make PLI give more incentives to the people who do more value addition in the country, incentivize setting up of ATMP facilities, display fab and display module manufacturing. So these are some of the suggestions which we shared with the government of India, and I'm really happy that they have really listened to it. And many of the actions what you are seeing today is the impact of whatever we as IESA and the industry body have been pushing at the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology level. I think with that, I think I talked about most of it. I think I will just stop here with the next slide. And this is actually the last slide, key recommendations, but I covered most of it. And I can stop here and then listen, and we can have now more or less an interactive session, if that makes sense. Next slide, actually, next slide will be the concluding slide, which is basically the same thing. Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. The next one. Yeah. So we can stop here, and then I'm now open to questions and answers. Yes, Jay.
Rupa, you can unmute the audience.
Yes, I have done.
Jay Chandra, you could ask the question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rajiv. The fantastic overview of the Indian semiconductor industry as well as electronic industry upcoming. Okay, see, when you say actually, like, there is a growth of almost GDP of 3% to 6%, almost it is shown. What will be the impact on the job opportunities in near future, about 5 years to 10 years, particularly for the engineering graduation?
So I think it directly reflects to close to 10 million jobs addition, direct and indirect jobs, when it comes to the impact from 3.6 to 6%. And as you know, these are
Okay.
all
Then
many of them are high value jobs when it comes to the R&D development. And then
yeah.
each job basically fuels indirect jobs of at least 3 to 4.
What will be the for freshers? What will be the job opportunities in this?
For freshers also, I think, see, what is happening is many of for the semiconductors, definitely it's going to be really high. The fact today is the number of jobs are much more than the kind of I mean, there's a demand supply gap today, if you ask me. If you have the right skills, the number of jobs available are really high. I think we have, as a result, we have seen it from many of our member companies. The attrition rate has gone pretty high because there's so much of jobs available in the market, both at the entry level as well as at the mid management level.
Is there any particular survey or anything done actually, like, what are the job opportunities? What is the skill set required?
There is no specific uh, done by IESA, but
Can
majority,
it be done
yeah, it is definitely possible
so
to
that
do.
that will help us, particularly in when changing the syllabus curriculum, so that we can implement the same? Because I am a part of industry institution interaction programs, so
Okay.
these can be taken in very seriously in education, because as per the new education policies, even and AICT also, yeah, VLSI is taken only for the post graduation, not for graduation. If that is the
Yeah.
case, then we can implement this thing in graduation program itself on a particular skill sets.
So I think it is a good idea. I think we have been as we I think we have actually initiated one of our. In fact, we had a strategy session, a brainstorming session, only on Saturday last week
Okay.
among IESA board members, and this was one of the things which we are going to kind of kick off. It got a green signal from the IESA board as of although we have not formalized it, but then we already got an informal go ahead from the board to really take it forward. So I don't mind, actually we can work together in this area, and you can get in touch with our CEO, who is, I think we recently have now our CEO in place by name Krishnamurthy Krishna. I don't know, many of you must be knowing he has been the past chair of IESA, and he has worked with companies like National Semiconductors, Texas Instruments, and as well as Rambus at a leadership position at the country head level. And he's now on board on IESA only 1 month back. We kind of onboarded him, and one of the areas he wants to and he's passionate about is how do we ensure, one, because we have two problems, if you want to hear from my side. See, today most of the engineering talent is moving towards software development, right, or
That's
IT.
correct.
and, and
Yes.
see, so we need to address that, and today the best talent does not come into the ESDM space, at least when it comes to the so what we have to do is it at a pre-12 level, so which means from the 10th uh, level we have to kind of make people understand that where the job opportunities are, uh, and uh, and the semiconductor will get kind of impacted globally because of it. And the reason for that is because the global big software giants are able to lure people with much higher salaries, and most of the millennials and most of the new generation, they generally see that, and many of us as well. So I don't really point a finger to the new generation. Many of us really get lured by the short term gains what we are getting. So that if you see the difference between the kind of salaries a fresher gets from the companies like Google's of this world or the Facebooks of this world compared to the traditional semiconductors companies, there's a gap, and there's a substantial gap in the range of 20 to 30%. So that is probably one of the reasons why a lot of talents gets attracted to those disciplines. So we'll have to address it right at the 10th standard level, where people are actually making up their mind. Because at 10th, they generally make up their mind whether they want to go into the engineering or they want to go, and by 12th, they kind of realize that the kind of discipline they want to go on is probably only software, because that's where the money is. So but then they have to really realize and understand that this is also fast catching up, and many of these big global companies are also fighting for talent, and that's why I said that we have seen attrition going really up in the last, despite pandemic, in the semiconductor, in the high skill IT jobs.
Yeah,
And
I understood.
to answer the
But
short answer, you can probably send out an email to Krishna and myself, or you can send it to me, and then we can probably take it forward.
yeah, in the most of the cases, because the first comers to the campus is IT industries. Their number also is a huge. That's the reason actually the first creamy students also will go into that, and we won't get a semiconductor industry. We won't get a proper design engineers. So better
No,
actually.
no, not really. See, actually, I think it is. See, for example, see how the campuses react is they also are pretty smart these days. I mean, many they have a cutoff that if this is the kind of the salary,
Yeah,
you will be allowed to come first. If this is the kind of salary, then you will be number two. I think they have their own ways and means depending upon what they feel more important. So that's why I said it has to be the core jobs has to be sensitized, and there are other ways and means of doing it. I think there's a combination. One is what you rightly said is that they generally all the Facebooks of this world, Amazons of this world, they come really pretty early and take the cream out of it, and what is left behind probably is then the people who go into the traditional. But then, having said that, there are many students who do not want to get into those companies, but then people with that kind of knowledge and foresight are definitely in minority too.
so I have some plans actually. I can discuss with you later.
Yeah,
I'll ask Mr. Prithvi to connect you, and I'll discuss on this. Thank you.
no problem. Thank you.
Rajiv, there's a question from the chat box.
Yeah, what's it?
Is
Can you
there any laboratory facility available for students to do project and open-ended learning?
can you repeat the question?
Is there any laboratory facility available for students to do projects and open-ended learning?
Mm, Generally, not. There's no such. I mean, unless they want to start their own company, get incubated, and there are so many incubators. But then, learning perspective, there are no. See, generally, people rely on the facilities what they have in the campuses, which is typically in the college campuses. There are no separate where people can go and start working or doing kind of a tinkling with all the there are no facility, but college definitely have it, right?
Rajiv, if I may, it may be something that BCIC and IESA can consider because, as you said, the importance of this subject, many times, as you said, we are dependent on colleges, and colleges for sure will not have the latest, CAE kind of tools, whether it's a mentor or a cadence or whatever.
Yeah.
And these kinds of things would be, I think, it will be a good jump start if we can talk to government and create something equivalent to an IIT. The sorry, not IIT. Um, Mr. Prithvi, bail me out. What is used for vocational training? Mm,
Sir?
What
Skill
what?
development, sir.
Skill development. Yes, sir.
So I think there are definitely possibilities of in that direction. See, for example, I think we talked about it, as I said, in our previous on. In fact, this Saturday only, we had a discussion on this. How do we enable people so that they can get access to these EDA tools? And see, I think there is a possibility, and I think, as I said, our new CEO is actually working on it. We can actually work offline and see how we can enable that part together. Probably we can work together if that
No,
makes sense.
definitely, sir. Because you see, as we say, if you look at the traditional vocational skills training, machinists, fitters, carpenters, etc., they are for those typically who have completed up to say 10th standard.
Yeah,
But if you, as you said, IP is so important. Uh, in terms of the ownership, fabless chip design or fabless chip companies, therein lies, I think, the catch where we have to sort of we find that the engineering colleges may not be may not be up with the latest tools, and may not be able to produce engineers with the desired level of skills that are needed by the industry. So this could be something where, like the IMTMA, the Indian Machine Tool Manufacturers Association, they have specific courses which are like finisher courses, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12-week courses where people are fully trained in CNC machining techniques, measurements, etc. Modern manufacturing techniques, basically.
Okay. I think I hear you.
In fact, sir, IESA can gather all the information about the requirement of all the semiconductor industry, particularly in the design and the testing and the development, so that we can go on a first preference to these colleges, so that we can get the creamy students and who are really thirst, and as well as they got a passion towards the semiconductor designs, so that before these IT industry can get into the colleges, and you can pick up the best of it out of it, because your requirement may not be in a huge number as actually what IT industry is recruiting, but definitely you will be having specific requirement of 8 to 10, whatever the number, but that will be a best of it.
Yeah, I mean, see, each companies have their own ways and means of doing it, but I think it's a good idea to see that if because now pandemic has taught us many innovative ways of managing things. If we can have a global or an India access of all these tools, which can be accessed offline, online by students, irrespective of whether he is in IIT or in college here in RV or in BITS. The people who want to access these tools so that they can build, they know exactly how to navigate the mentor tools or synopsis tools and other things, and who want to get into this kind of design activities as their career, they can really play around with that even before and they move out of the college. As you rightly pointed out, is that many of these courses today are postgraduate, are dealt in the post graduation. Can we bring it to the third year course or fourth year course so that we can kind of have people ready even after graduation with some of the skills which can be utilized by the semiconductor design companies and ESDM as well. So I am not being, I think, yeah, I think we also lack the ESDM, the product design, embedded design, because although we have so many companies based out of in India who are doing all the embedded software, but then when it comes to building embedded products, I think we still rely on global needs. So I think we have to build those skills. And one of the reasons why this is not being done, because there are very few people who take embedded product design as their interest or as their focus after they finish their graduation.
Mr. Prithvi, I think somebody raised their hand.
Yeah, good afternoon. This is Girish here. That's my voice is audible.
Yes, Garish.
Yes, Girish,
Raju,
go
first of
ahead.
all, Raju, first of all, thank you for a very crisp, clear insight to the current and the future scenarios of the semiconductor and the electronics field in the India landscape. Uh, my question is little a very high level. I'm not sure how relevant this is to this current forum. Just curious to know, since semiconductor manufacturing is all about deep-rooted wafer manufacturing, silicon wafer manufacturing, where the core of semiconductor local manufacturing starts, if you have to look at that way. I know it is pretty high, deep-rooted in technology, very high on capex, and ever-changing scenarios, both in terms of its performance and the sizes. From your experience, Raju, what do you feel the government and the industry should do differently to give it a quantum jump start rather than look at incremental steps in the semiconductor local manufacturing?
So, if you ask me personally, while government may focus on the state of the art, and they are doing that, so I think what we as a country need to focus on is on the one is the fabulous part of it, which I talked about and then from a fabrication perspective, I think we should really focus on the silicon carbide and gallium arsenide fabs, which are specialty fabs, which are still not popular because it's still coming up. All the semiconductor players are having today a couple of devices, or at least 5% or 10% of their devices run on these new upcoming technologies, whether it's gallium arsenide or GaN technologies or silicon carbide. If we are able to set up um, a commercial fab of these to start with, it will help us build the confidence. It will also ensure that we are not doing a catching up game, because if we have today, for example, if we had a fab 10 years back, we would have been talking about 18 nanometer, and now we are all talking about 7 nanometer or below. So and then the fact is, India as a country, uh, can we really afford to have a 7 nanometer fab? I think ideally some of the big guys should come and should set it up, whether it's TSMC of this world or UMCs of this world, who can set up the fab. But expecting government, see, all these 7 nanometer fab, they cost you 15, I think it's upwards of $10 billion, right? And so that's why if you compare it with the latest technology, gallium, the when I said gallium arsenide or these fabs, they cost you in the tune of $3 to $4 billion, and still their shelf life is, at least if you ask me from a silicon, because this from my experience, having worked with TI, and having some knowledge about it, I think 45 nanometer 45 nanometer will remain relevant for in analog area, will remain relevant for at least another 25 to 30 years. So you have a good headroom. So if probably if I have to invest as a country, I would probably go that way. That gives me, because that also helps us to establish the ecosystem. When I am talking about the ecosystem, I'm talking about the raw materials which are used in the semiconductors, the gases, because today we have 3 to 4 fabs in the country, whether it is Sitar in Bangalore or Mohali, we have SCL. Most of their raw materials, more than 99% of their raw materials actually comes from whether it is China or some other US and Europe and Japan, of course. But and that's where we are coming up with a study, uh, can India become and start supplying to the global fabs or global ATMPs even before having our own fab? What that means is, can we incentivize the existing automotive suppliers, whether it's paints industry or the gases industry or the minerals or the chemicals industry across India, which is pretty sizable, and incentivize them so that they can start producing the grade or the quality which semiconductor players can consume. If we do that, and if we incentivize that, if they start producing, we already will have an ecosystem in the country. And we realize the importance of this, and we had a discussion with, in fact, during the interaction with the prime ministers, we although we didn't get opportunity to talk to him directly or comment, but with the commerce ministry, I got an opportunity to talk to the secretary, and he kind of liked this idea of how do we incentivize the chemicals and the gases in this industry so that they can start become part of the global value chain. So my suggestion is, first talk about having a 45 and 90 nanometer analog fab, and also in parallel start incentivizing the raw material producers of these fabs so that they can not only supply to these fabs whenever they come or to the existing fabs in the country, but they also start exporting it. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Raju. Thanks for the insights. I understand it's not going to be easy game to start with, but point well taken.
Thank you. Okay.
Prithvi, if there are no questions, can I say something? Mr. Prithvi, if there are no
Yes, sir.
questions, say
Sir,
something.
please, sir, please go ahead,
Yes, sir.
sir.
Yeah, please go ahead. Sir.
You actually you have said it very rightly. I actually want to go back almost 30 years. I was based in Dallas mm, uh, in 1983, 84. And I got a phone call from my father, a senior captain of industry. He says, son, do you know this company? They are looking around for space. They don't know whether to settle on Bombay or Bangalore. And, they're set up some kind of center. I think it's a software center or something like that. I said, oh, okay. Which company is this? It's very exciting. Hey, yeah, this is company. Have you heard of it? It's called Texas Instruments. And that picture, I think, still is in your lobby of the first Texas Instruments satellite dish arriving,
Yeah.
what is at our past president's building, Mr. Valiappa, at Sona Towers in a bullock cart.
Yeah.
You know, and you mentioned today Bangalore is the place where people come for semiconductor design. And I just wanted to say that was the seed planted by TI, which was subsequently followed by HP and others, and it created that ecosystem.
True. True. Yeah.
And I think India has to look at a fab. As you said, we could look at 45 nanometer analog fabs. We can look at incentivizing. We have to incentivize foreign players to come to India, because that is what is going to create that ecosystem. And 20 years from now or 30 years from now, only then will we be in a position to match the electronics ecosystem that China today commands. It's not, if you look at China, the products are going into and getting made in China, not because of anything else, but because there is an electronic component ecosystem, electronics design, semiconductor, etc., etc. That whole ecosystem, just as Bangalore has got its
Yes.
software and related design ecosystem in place, colleges, etc. All that is going to come in place only when we put
Exactly.
this seed in there, and from this seed,
Exactly.
that grove of ecosystem is going to come in place.
Exactly. Well said. Well concluded. Thank you. I think looks like we don't have any more
No,
questions.
looks like we don't have Mr. Prithvi. I think we should
Yeah.
proceed with the vote of
Yeah.
thanks. It's a
Yes.
big, fantastic program. You have recorded it. I'll definitely request for the presentation, and I'll request for a connect to Rajiv ji offline after this.
Sure, sir. You'd like to sum it up, sir, Devesh ji?
I think I said what I
Well,
had
this
to
is
say. I mean,
Okay.
I think on behalf of the chamber, I think Srini San is here. I thought I saw him. Mr. A.V. Srinivasan is here. Uh, the kind of solutions his company put together in the mechanical space, in terms of integrating electronics into Industry 4.0 digital manufacturing, is something that we should hear from. But if he's around, I would request him to give a vote of thanks if he's around. I'm not sure.
No, he has left the.
Acha, okay. Uh, I mean, he sets up these manufacturing cells using, the traditional machines, but extensive use of robotics, etc. So, I mean, that's the same way of coming into the new age. But Rajiv ji, on behalf of the chamber, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
It was a fantastically crisp presentation. Shows a lot of, the way the Indian semiconductor industry is right now. Okay, it is still in a kind of a virtual form. The physical form definitely needs to be boosted. Uh, COVID has shown us that we cannot, the world had over a period of time become totally reliant on China. And, it's basically on supply of world semiconductors. And we are seeing today the after effects with, delivery times running into 18 months. It's kind of bordering on ridiculous. I think the world is ready to set up alternate manufacturing sites. These are and as a risk mitigation for the future. India, I think, is at a unique location at in terms of in the timeline of history, to take fullest advantage of this confluence of events. And thank you so much for sharing it. I should ask how BCIC and IESA can work closer together. Our chairman of ease of doing our our past our chairman of the ease of doing business task force is Mr. M.N. Vidyashankar, who's been a past leader of IESA, of course, past Chief Secretary of the state. So we definitely see this is a technique which it is an area of industry that we need to look at for the future. Thank you so much for coming, taking your time. I must thank each and every one of the participants that you have taken time out of your day, especially on a Monday morning. You've come. Thank you so much for participating in this program. And I wish you a very pleasant and profitable week ahead.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you, Devesh. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Devesh, for this nicely summing up. Rajiv, is a small ceremonial thing to be completed from the chamber. As a token of appreciation, we would like to actually hand over a memento to you. And this memento will reach out to your office or to your residence as soon as possible. After which we'll have the national anthem also played. Over to you, Purushottam.
Thank you.
Now we'll have the national anthem played.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rajiv.
Thank you.